we have seen matrix multiplication and how its performance can be improved by improving the locality, and also we talked about parallelism a little bit. In the next few modules, we are going to focus on affine loop transformations. So what do I mean? Well, we'll focus on numerical applications that use arrays as data structures and which have simple regular access patterns on those arrays. So what do I mean by simple regular access patterns? Well, we'll assume affine array accesses with respect to surrounding loop indices. So if the loop is iterating from, let's say, 1 to n, then the access pattern on the array is an affine expression on I, which is the iteration variable. Right, and there could be multiple. There could be this is just one loop. There could be a loop nest depth of a loop nest of depth 2 or a loop nest of depth 3, and so on. And we're going to see some examples. So notice that the key operating word here is affine array accesses. And before we talk about this any further, we need to define what's an affine function. An affine function on variables x1, x2, xn. It can be expressed as summation over I ci xi, where I goes from 1 to n, plus c0, right? And where ci's and c0 are constants, numeric constants. So for example, 2 into x plus 1 is an affine expression on x. And when I say affine array accesses with respect to surrounding loop indices, the array accesses can be expressed as affine functions. That means this particular form, ci xi summation plus c0, of the surrounding loop indices. What are surrounding loop indices? The indices of the loops, the iteration variables of the loops that surround that particular statement. So for example, if it was a loop of a single loop, then it's just one variable, one surrounding loop index variable I. If there was a loop nest of depth 2, then there are two index variables, one let's say I and another is let's say j, and so on. So here's a simple example. Here is a single loop. Here's an array A of size, let's say 200. And then I have a loop which says for int I equals 0 to 100, I plus plus, A of 2 into I equals 4. Now this is an affine array access because the address of the array A of 2 into I is basically, I can write this as the address of A, which is let's say A plus 2 into I, right? Into size of whatever is the int, right? So this whole expression, A has a constant address because it's a global variable, and size of int is let's say 4 on your machine architecture, and so this becomes constant plus 8 into I, and that's an affine expression. So overall, the array address A of A2 into I is an affine function of the loop iteration variable, the surrounding loop iteration variable I. Now, let's look at the advantage that we have by using such specialized analyses for affine array accesses. First of all, I would like to point out that for several numerical applications, such as in the domains of image processing, graphics, also recently machine learning, it is common to have such patterns where the accesses are affine addresses of the surrounding loop iteration variables, or these are also called affine loops. And also the loops, the iteration variables themselves have a very regular pattern and have a lower and upper bound. And because these are common, it makes sense to optimize, have special optimizations for such patterns. And what are some optimizations that such patterns enable? Well, if you look at this particular loop, we can see that all these accesses, A of 2 in A, the 2 into ith element of A, are all independent. So the first element would be A of 0, that will be accessed in the first iteration. In the second iteration, it will be A of 2. In the third iteration, it will be A of 4, and so on. And so one easy analysis that we can do just by looking at this code is that different iterations access different regions of memory or different elements of the memory. And so it is possible to perform each iteration in parallel with other iterations because they do not interfere, they do not have any data dependency, they do not touch any common piece of memory. So, however, let's say if I also had another variable j in this, and let's say j was not not a loop iteration variable, not a regular loop iteration variable, j was just some other variable, and I had this particular statement in my loop, aj equals 0. Now suddenly we cannot perform each iteration in parallel with other iterations, because we don't know whether j matches with any of the iterations 2 into I, right? And so it's no longer possible that to compute each iterations, parallelize each iteration of this loop separately, because we don't know if j may be equal to 2 into I for some I. And so notice that this is no longer an affine loop nest, because j is no longer, aj, the address access to aj is no longer an affine expression on the surrounding loop variables, because j is not a surrounding loop iteration variable. So the other point here is that if for such affine loop nests, the types of transformations that are possible are much richer, such as parallelization of the loop iterations. Here is another example. Let's say I have a of 2 into I equals a of 2 into I minus 1 star 3 percentage 31. Now this is just some made up example, but I want to point out that it's not necessary that if all accesses are affine accesses, it's always possible to parallelize the iterations of a loop. Notice that in this particular loop, all array accesses are actually affine expressions. The addresses are affine expressions of the surrounding loop variables, whether you take a of 2 into I or a 2 into I minus 1. These are all affine expressions on I, which is where I is the surrounding loop iteration variable. However, there is a data dependency across iterations. So the element 2 into I at index 2 into I minus 1 will be computed in a previous iteration, let's say, and maybe just to make this more clear, let's say this was 2 into I minus 2. So in a previous iteration, I have computed a of 2 into I minus 2, and this here I'm computing 2 into I, and there's a data dependency, and now it is no longer possible to execute these iterations in parallel. So even though all accesses here are affine accesses inside the loop, it's still not possible to execute these iterations in parallel, and we would like to develop an analysis that is able to identify when is it possible to execute the iterations in parallel and by how much amount, and when it is not, right? And so that's the kind of analysis that we want to develop. A, because such affine loop nests are common, and B, the types of transformations that such affine loop nests enable are actually very rich and very consequential. Okay, so to be able to do this, we are going to develop a set of algorithms that is commonly called the polyhedral framework. The basic idea here is that we use linear algebra and integer linear programming techniques to reason about these things, about inter-iteration dependencies and interactions, and we try to optimize for parallelism and locality, similar to how we tried to optimize for parallelism and locality when we were discussing the matrix multiplication example. The assumptions we'll make while we are in this polyhedral framework of reasoning, and this is basically defining the scope of programs that we would be trying to optimize based on this polyhedral framework, is that all loop iteration variables have a lower and upper bound. So all loop iteration variables iterate from some lower bound to some upper bound. So we know what those bounds are. And the other interesting assumption that we'll make is that a loop iteration variable increments by 1 in each iteration. So for example, it goes from 10 to 20 and increments by 1 in every iteration. Now this may seem like a limiting assumption. Why do I want the loop iteration variable to increment by 1? Why can't it increment by 2 or 3 or 4? The important implication here is that it must increment by a constant step. Okay, and if it increments by a constant step, then it fits in this framework. And if it increments by a constant step, then it is always possible. So if the variable increments by a value which is constant but not equal to 1, then we can introduce another iteration variable that increments by 1 and express the original iteration variable in terms of the new variable. So let's say there was an iteration variable that was incrementing by 2 on every iteration. Let's say this variable was I. Then what I can do is I can introduce a new variable I prime that only increments by 1 on every iteration, and then just say I equals 2 into I prime. right? Or express I as an affine expression of I prime. So this is called normalization of the iteration variables, and I'm going to bring my loops in this normalized form, in this canonical form, where every loop iteration variable increments by exactly 1 in each iteration, because that just makes the rest of the analysis easier, and this can be thought of just as a pre-processing step. If it does not increment by 1 but increments by a constant value, we can always introduce a new variable so that that variable increments by 1 and the original variable is written in terms of the new variable. Here is an example of an affine loop nest, affine loop code with a loop nest depth of 2. So far we have looked at single loops, but let's look at this loop. For I equals 0, I is less than equal to 5, I plus plus. For j equals I. Now notice that the lower bound need not be a constant. It can be an affine function of the surrounding loop variables. So here j is starting from I, j is less than 7, once again less than equal to 7, and once again the upper bound need not be a constant. In this example it is a constant, but it could have been some affine function of I, j plus plus, and then I say z of j comma I equals 0. Now there are two things here. First of all, this expression, this array access z of j comma I is actually an affine address with respect to the surrounding loop variables. What are the surrounding loop variables? I and j. Now let's look at the iteration space. Let's look at what is the iteration space. I iterates from 0 to 5 and j iterates from 1 to 7. So I can now represent this iteration space of the loop iteration variables as a graph, and here I represent I on the y-axis and j on the x-axis, and these are all the points. So starting from 0, so this is 0 and this is 5, this is 7 and this is 5, alright. And so if I draw this shaded region represents all the loop iteration values, all the values of the loop iteration indices that this loop is going to go through. So for example, I iterates from 0 to 5, so this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then for every value of I, j iterates from I to 7. So for I equals 0, j iterates from 0 to 7. So these are all the points 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all the way to 7 for I equals 0. Similarly, I equals 1, it goes from 1 to 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. And so this space formed by the iteration, and by the way, it stops at I equals 5 because that's the upper bound of I. Now the space of iterations that is shown with this shaded region is formed by is basically representing all the possible values that the tuple I comma j can take, right? For example, I comma j can take the value 2 comma 2, but it cannot take the value, for example, 3 comma 2, right? Because that's outside this space. The other interesting thing to note here is that this particular space is actually bounded by straight lines, and whatever is the region that is demarcated by these straight lines, by some direction of the straight lines, is basically this region. And in fact, it can be shown that this is always going to be a convex region. What do I mean by a convex region? A convex region is a region where if you draw a line between any 2 points in that region, then all points in that line belong to that region. So for example, this red line here between this point and this point, all these points basically belong to this shaded region, right? That's what a convex region is. For example, this is not a convex region, okay, because between this point and this point, if I draw a line, then there are some points that lie outside the convex region. But this particular region is a convex region because irrespective of what points I choose, if I draw a line between those 2 points, those points are guaranteed to lie within the shaded region, between the iteration space region. And so this is actually going to be a property just by the scope of the program that we are looking at, which is that everything has an upper bound and a lower bound, and increments by 1. We are going to always get a convex polyhedron, and in this case it's a convex polygon in 2D space, or convex polyhedron in 2D space. A convex polygon, an interval in a 1D space is also a convex polygon. And in general, the space of loop iteration variables for the scope of programs that we are going to study in the polyhedral framework can be represented always as a convex polyhedron in a d-dimensional space. Alright, so we just saw an example of a 2-dimensional space, but I can now generalize it to a dimensional space. For example, for a 3D dimensional space, it will be a 3D polyhedron. For a 4-dimensional space, it will be a 4D polyhedron, and so on. Where D is the loop nest depth and the number of loop iteration variables. So notice that in the previous slide, the loop nest depth was 2, and so we got a 2-dimensional convex polyhedron. If it's 3, then we get a 3-dimensional polyhedron. In general, if we have a D depth loop nest, then we get a D-dimensional space of iterations, and where each dimension represents one iteration variable corresponding to that particular line or loop in the entire loop nest. So in this representation of the loop iteration space, every iteration of the loop nest is basically represented by a point in the polyhedral space. Alright, so in other words, there's a one-to-one mapping between loop iterations and points in the polyhedral space. So we are going to represent the space of loop iterations as these convex polyhedra, because that just makes it easier for us to reason about all the kind of dependencies and parallelism and locality opportunities that may be possible. And this is also the reason why this is called the polyhedral framework. There are two categories of transformations that we are going to study in the polyhedral framework. One involves affine partitioning, which means you split up the polyhedron, which is, in other words, I split up the iteration space into components that can be executed in parallel, or in general reordered with each other. So now that I have basically been able to represent the iterations of my loop as points in a polyhedron, now I would want to do some kind of analysis to figure out which of these points can be reordered with which of the other points. In other words, I may want to basically partition these points into different sets such that it is okay to execute each set in parallel with the other set. So maybe within the set I need to follow a certain order, but every set can be executed in parallel with any other set. More generally, any set can be reordered with respect to any other set. If it can be reordered, then it can also be executed in parallel, because the relative order of execution would not matter. So for example, if this was my loop iteration if this was my loop iteration space, which is this, let's say this rectangle, this was representing my convex polyhedron, then maybe my partition is going to be these diagonal lines. And notice that each of these lines basically may have one or more points. So for example, this line has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points, let's say. And so these lines are basically representing partitions. So in other words, these iterations can be executed in parallel with the iterations on the second line, and similarly with the third line and fourth line. And so I can divide this iteration space into partitions. I can partition this iteration space such that each partition needs to be executed serially, but across partitions I can execute the code in parallel. And so this kind of approach is called affine partitioning, and we would want to do some kind of data dependence analysis to figure out how we can partition an iteration space such that all the data dependencies are still preserved. Recall that we saw some examples where the loop could be parallelized and some other examples where the loop could not be parallelized. And the difference between the two was the nature of data dependencies. And sometimes the loop may be parallelized only up to a certain degree. For example, it was a 2-loop nest depth, but maybe you can only parallelize one of the loop bodies. And even there we need to, so here the loop may be for I equals 0 to 10, for j equals 0 to 5, and that gives you this rectangle as a convex polyhedron. But the data dependency, the body of the loop basically determines some kind of data dependencies which says, oh, you can neither parallelize on I, nor you can parallelize on j, but it is maybe possible to parallelize on I minus j. So along this plane of paths, it is possible to parallelize it. All right. We're going to see this in more detail, but basically the partition of this iteration space such that within a partition there may be data dependencies, but across partition there are no data dependencies. And if we partition it in such a way, then each partition can be executed in parallel with every other partition, and we can achieve better parallelism. The other category of transformation that we're going to study is blocking. And this is something that we've already been introduced to with the example of matrix multiplication. But matrix multiplication was a very special example, and we were just studying that in isolation. But in general, for any loop nest that has affine accesses, recall that matrix multiplication is an example of a loop nest that has only affine accesses, and so it is an affine loop nest and fits in our polyhedral framework. But we would like to generalize that analysis to blocking, which basically is able to block any loop nest that has a potential of improving locality due to blocking. And so what is blocking? Blocking creates a hierarchy of iterations. Recall that we basically, from a 3 loop nest, we went to a 6 loop nest, where the upper hierarchy was basically iterating with steps of B, and the inner hierarchy of the inner 3 loop nest was doing a block multiply, where the iteration step was only 1. So it creates a hierarchy of iterations, and in general, given any loop nest, it may or may not be a matrix multiplication loop nest. How do I figure out whether it is possible to create such a hierarchy of iteration space or iterations such that we can exploit the cache locality in a better way? And so that both affine partitioning and blocking are categories of transformations that the polyhedral framework will enable. Basic idea behind polyhedral transformations. Well, the basic idea is that once we have represented the iteration space as convex polyhedrons or convex polyhedra, then we're going to use linear algebra techniques to help determine the best affine partition and best blocking strategy. Okay. So for example, here is a loop for I equals 0 to n, I plus plus, zi equals xi into 2. And here our analysis should be able to partition the address space. So firstly, what is the iteration space? The iteration space is, let's say this was I. Now the iteration space is 0, 1, ... n. Okay. And how can I partition the address space such that each of the partitions can be executed in parallel? Well, in this case, it turns out that these have no data dependencies across iterations, because they are all accessing different elements, and so the partition is just, each partition is basically a singleton element. 0 is a single partition, 1 is another partition, 2 is another partition, and so each of these iterations can be executed in parallel. In general, this is a way to partition this and execute this code in parallel. Let's say I have m processors, then I'm going to define B equals n by m ceiling. And so the idea is that I'm going to iterate I'm going to have B iterations in every processor. Right? I have m processors, I have n jobs to be done. So how many jobs do I do on every processor? I do n by m jobs, and then maybe I take a ceiling because I need an integral number of jobs. So for I equals B into P, so P is basically the processor number, which ranges between 0 and m. So I say B into P, I is less than let's say B into P plus 1. So I want to go from B into P to B into P plus 1 with the added quirk that the last processor should not go beyond n. If n is not a multiple of m, so just to take care of that, I'm saying minimum of n comma B into P plus 1, I plus plus, and the body remains the same, zi equals xi into 2. So notice that the code is pretty much the same. It's just the upper bound and the lower bound that have changed. I'm now iterating from B into P to B into P plus 1, and barring the last iteration, last processor, on every processor. And every processor is basically, so I partitioned the space into partition. I partitioned the iteration space into m partitions, and each partition has a label called P, and depending on what label it is, I execute the corresponding code. This kind of parallelism is also called SPMD parallelism, single process multiple data. So basically you have the same logic that is executing on different regions of data. For example, the first process or the first CPU or the first processor is going to execute the same logic for elements 0 to m, 0 to B. Right? And the second one is going to execute from B to 2B. The third one is going to execute from 2B to 3B, and so on. Depending on what the value of parameter P is, I'm going to do the same logic for different regions of data. And so in this case, it's the same code that is parameterized by P, and depending on P, I basically use different data, and that's why it's called an SPMD program. Also, when we do this kind of parallelism, After all the processors are done, we need barrier synchronization. So what is barrier synchronization? After everybody is done, we wait for everybody to complete before we move on to the next part of the program. Because we want, if the next part of the program depends on all the values in Z to be filled in, then I need a barrier synchronization. And recall that a barrier synchronization basically involves waiting for all the processors to finish before any of the processor moves forward.